Welcome back, everyone. In this session, the first thing that I want to fix is the way that we write our CSS. We said that there's a third way to write CSS codes, and the third way is actually the best way to do so. In my index.html file, as you can see, this is my style tag, and as you can see, we have written a lot of CSS code so far, and imagine that this project hasn't gone so far. Our project isn't so big at the moment. Imagine if a project goes so big. So if we have all of our CSS code in our index.html file, it becomes a bit annoying because all of our codes are kind of mixed together. It's better to have our CSS codes separate in another file and our HTML code in another file. That's why it's the best practice. So in order to create a CSS file, I can, let's put that over there. I can click here and create a new file, and I can call it whatever I want, something.css, okay? And usually for HTML files, we name the main file index.html, and for CSS, we usually write it styles.css. And in style.css, I just copy all of my CSS codes. So in CSS file, we do not need to have that style tag. It's important, don't forget that. We do not need to have that style tag, so we just write it like this, and we will remove this style tag because we no longer has it. So if we go to our code and hit refresh, you will see that all the CSS code has been lost and we have just pure HTML. So it's because we created a CSS file, we put the codes there, but we never attached this CSS file to this index.html. We might want to tell the browser, hey browser, go ahead, there's a file and there's a CSS file, and attach it to our project. So in order to attach files, we use a tag, and the tag is a link tag. And sure enough, the link tag should be placed inside head because it's not something that we want to present to our user. It's some data for the browser. The link attribute has two special attributes. First one is rel, and the second one is href. Well, you might say, wait a minute, href, shouldn't href be supposed to be for a tags, for links? Yes. Actually, href is not a general attribute, which means we cannot use it for div or p or h2. It's meaningless for them. But for href, for a tags, has a different meaning. It means we want to redirect user to a link. But href for link attribute is something else, because we want to say, hey, we want to attach the file and we want to say where the file is actually located. So href in link and a are kind of similar, because in a tag we can specify that if we want to redirect user to somewhere else, for example on google.com, and we can also redirect user to another HTML file in our project. Same goes for href in link. We can attach a file in our directory, for example this CSS file, and we can also attach a file in another website, and that's called CDN, Content Delivery Network, and we will talk about that CDN, but for now let's just learn how to attach the files inside our project. So that path writing rules that I told you about will be applied for this link as well. For example, I want to attach a file. That file is a style.css, right? So where is the style.css is located? Well, we are in index.html now, so since style.css and index.html are inside the same folder, or in fact they are in same level, some people would say, we can just write a style.css and that's enough. Let's go here, hit refresh, and as you can see that this is good. And let's create a folder here. I want to call that CSS. Usually we can and cut this style.css inside this CSS, and let's move. And this is the more proper way to do this, because in a real world project usually JS files are inside a folder, images are inside a folder, anything is inside a folder, and we should categorize our files. It's better. So now that we moved our CSS file, we need to mention that you need to go first to go CSS folder, then find style.css there. So that's it. We learned how to attach CSS file, and this is the third way of writing CSS codes, and this is actually the best way, and it's considered best practice, and it's recommended. The second thing that I want to do is, let's close this. Since from now on I have my HTML.css here, and I have my style.css here, and it's very good now that all my codes are in separate files, and it's easy for me. So the second thing that I want to do now is I want to learn about inline block display. Because remember when I told you that I once had a friend who was trying so hard to give a margin top to a span tag. For example, let's have a span tag here and call it some text here. Let's go back to browser and hit refresh here, and as you can see that, let's zoom in a little bit on 200% zoom. And as you can see, this some text is here. Imagine that I want to give a margin top to this span tag. So this span tag, let's go here, inspect element, because this is a temporary thing. I just go here and on inspect, I do that. So, and there's another thing about this. I can go dock to right, dock to left, or whatever. And since I don't want to constantly be worried about my face to cover these codes, I just go here and dock it into a new window. So that's simpler for me. So I can go here, this span tag, you can see I can go here and give it a margin of 25 pixel. Okay, as you can see, if you go here now, hit inspect element, and let's position this someplace that we like. This some text here now has a margin from left and right, but the margin top and bottom did not apply. So if you remember my friend, when he was so mad at CSS and said, why margin top is not working, look, I'm so mad, I told them to change the display so that you can fix this problem. So if I go ahead and change the display to block, okay, sorry, what was that? To block, you can see this problem got fixed, and we have that margin that we wanted. But the problem is, someone might say, what if I don't want to use block tag because I wanted to have this some text and temp text inside it, beside each other? Let's change, and for the moment let's remove this color for that. Let's go here, inspect element, and for temporarily let's remove this background color so that we can understand that margin better. As you can see, the margin has been applied from all directions since it's a block display, but for inline display you can see the margin will not be applied from bottom and top. So there's another display called inline block, where inline block is used for some of the behaviors of inline block is similar to block, and some of them are to inline. But which behaviors exactly? As you can see, now this span tag is treated like inline elements, which means it's not covering 100% width of its parent, but margin from top and bottom is now being applied. But margin top and bottom won't be applied to inline button because it's inline. The browser is trying to force it to all of these tags be inside one line. It's inline. So that's why margin top and bottom does not apply to them. There's another difference between inline elements and block elements is that you cannot force the height of inline elements. For example, as I told you, you can remember that the height of elements will be detected automatically. And for example, this span tag has a height where the height is as much as text that it contains. So if I go ahead and write, for example, height 250 pixels, so we change this height manually, you can see it now occupies 250 pixels of height. But let's change it to inline element, and as you can see, the inline element, this is, oh sorry, I changed it to block. I said inline. I changed it to block and I was wondering why, what's the problem. Okay, this I changed it to inline element. As you can see now, that height 250 pixel is meaningless for an inline attribute, and that's browser is telling us. So this is another difference that I wanted you to know about block and inline block elements. So now at this moment we now know everything about inline block and their differences. Okay, something that now let's get back to our codes, and something that I forgot to mention was that this rel attribute that we had here. We told what href is, but we haven't said what is rel attribute for now. This rel attribute it stands for relationship. Since we can attach different type of files to our document, we use link to attach all of those. But since we have different things, this rel attribute is used for that. For example, in order to attach CSS files, we use a rel style sheet. But in order to attach, for example, icon, this icon you can see here on browser tab. This is something that we can customize. For example, let's have an image here and paste this image in my project. So I can go here in images, and I have already copied an image and I paste this here. And this is just an image, a logo here, my logo here. And let's just rename this logo with, I want to have it with a lowercase l. And let's go back to our codes, and we need to have another rel, and the rel now is icon. So we use link attribute in order to attach icons, but let's fix the path as well. You need to go inside images, and there's a logo.png waiting for you there. So this is our logo.png here. Okay, so go ahead and attach this image, and the relationship is icon, so it knows it has to use this image for our browser tab title. So hit refresh, and as you can see, we have a new logo there. So let's check something else here. There's a website I want you to know, and that website is W3 Schools. W3 Schools is a great website for documentation and resources. For example, here in this session, when I was talking about rel, I talked about style sheet and this, where is it? This icon attribute. And as you can see, it has a lot of different possible values. In 99% of the times, we are going to use a style sheet or icon. I haven't seen anyone using anything other than these two. I've been programming for almost 10 years now, and in all of these 10 years, I've never seen anyone use anything except this style sheet and icon. So that's why when I'm teaching, I always cover important stuff, useful stuff. But if you want to have a complete access and complete documentation of what I say, you can just use W3 Schools. For example, you can search CSS rel attribute, and as you can see, the first link comes from W3 Schools. So W3 Schools is a great resource for you guys to have. So let's say the last thing that I want to say in this session, and that's about input tag. As you can see, this is an input tag, and we use input tags to get data from user. You have filled out a lot of forms in web browsers so many times, and you have seen a lot. But input types have too many. We have too many types of inputs, and let's see two of them, for example. So let's create another div here, and we call this div our inputs. Okay, our inputs, and let's comment that. And in this div, I first create two inputs. Okay, and as you can see, there's a type attribute for anything. For example, let's use one of them for input type text, and use another input and use the type password. We have too many types for input. For now, we can see only text and password for now. And let's get back to our code, hit refresh, and as you can see, there are two inputs, and this is our input, text input, and we are going to use that for username, and this is our password. They are the same, but the only difference is that the password is like this and the input type text is like that. And the display of these input elements are inline block by default. So let's make sure if it's in inline block. If we want to make sure, we can test a margin top on these, margin top and 25 pixel, and sure enough this margin top is applied to this. So it's in inline block, the default display of this. These input tags have so many other specific attributes which we will cover throughout the course, but these are all the things that I want you to learn in this session. So let's sum up what we learned in this session. So the first thing that we learned was that the best way to write CSS code is to attach the CSS file. Don't forget that, and since from now on that's what we always are going to do. And the another difference that I mentioned about the height, know that, don't forget that. And this is the only difference between inline block elements and block elements. And the other thing is about W3 schools, check out that. And the new CSS properties that we learned height, but we didn't see width in this session. Well, width is exactly like height, but it's just used for width. Okay, and about display, we saw block and inline in previous sessions, but this inline block is something that we learned new and in this session. And about tags, these are the new tags that we learned. And about this value, placeholder, and name, these are what we are going to learn in next sessions, or next two session. I don't know, but it has too many specific attributes. We know what type is, and we have seen two types, but we see other types as well. So this is it. That's all I wanted you to learn, and let's hope that I see you in next session.